I used to believe that peace meant finally having control over everything, my life, my emotions, my future, the people around me. I thought if I could just arrange things the right way, if I could make everyone happy, if I could anticipate every possible problem before it happened, then I'd finally be safe. Then I'd be able to breathe. But the truth is that belief nearly destroyed me, because the harder I tried to control the world, the more it controlled me. It's strange, isn't it? How we convince ourselves that we're building order when really we're just building cages. I used to wake up with this invisible tension in my chest, like I had to keep everything from falling apart. Every message I didn't get, every silence from someone I cared about, every small mistake at work, it all felt like proof that I was failing, that something was slipping away, and I couldn't stand that feeling of losing grip, even though I never really had a grip to begin with. What I didn't realize back then was how fragile it made me. Every time someone disagreed with me, every time something went differently from what I'd planned, I'd fall apart inside. Maybe I didn't always show it, but I'd spiral, quietly, secretly. I'd tell myself I was just being responsible, just trying to fix things, but what I was really doing was running away from the one thing I couldn't fix: myself. You see, there's a certain kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle you can't even name. I was constantly managing, calculating, anticipating, as if I could outthink the universe. But life doesn't work that way. No matter how tightly you hold the reins, life has its own rhythm, and at some point, it will remind you who's really in control. Usually through loss, through something you can't predict or prevent. For me, it wasn't one big event. It was more like a quiet collapse. 1,000 small disappointments accumulating until one day I just couldn't pretend anymore. I remember sitting in my car after work one evening, unable to move. Everything looked the same. People walking, cars passing, the city breathing. But something inside me had broken. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like a realization. I'd been living as if peace could be earned, when it could only be allowed. That moment was painful, but it was also the beginning of something real. For the first time, I saw how much of my life was built around the illusion of control. I wasn't living. I was defending my image, my beliefs, my expectations, my fragile sense of self-worth. It's funny how we try to control things to feel safe, not realizing that control is the very thing that keeps us anxious. The more we tighten our grip, the more life slips through our fingers. I remember reading something by Jung once. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." I didn't understand it fully back then, but that sentence haunted me. It made me question how much of my so-called control was actually just my unconscious trying to protect itself. How many of my choices came from fear rather than freedom. How much of my striving was just a disguised form of avoidance. It took me a long time to admit it, but I was afraid of stillness, of silence, because silence leaves no place to hide. In silence, the truth catches up to you. The parts of you you've been avoiding, the shame, the grief, the loneliness, they all rise to the surface. And I wasn't ready to meet them. I thought if I just kept myself busy enough, distracted enough, I could keep them buried. But the truth doesn't go away. It waits, patiently. Eventually, I had to face something I'd been denying for years. Peace isn't something you build outside of yourself. It's something you uncover within. You don't get there by controlling the waves. You get there by learning to float. That realization changed everything for me. It didn't happen overnight. It still doesn't. But it's like learning to breathe again, slowly, gently, without fighting for air. I started to notice how often I reacted automatically, how often I was at war with reality. I'd get irritated when someone didn't act the way I wanted, when plans changed, when life refused to cooperate with my expectations. But now I see that all that frustration was really just resistance. Resistance to what is. The mind wants certainty, but life offers change. And the more you demand stability, the more pain you create for yourself. Little by little, I began to let go, not in a dramatic, spiritual way, just in the smallest, most human moments. I'd remind myself, this doesn't have to go my way. When something fell apart, I'd breathe and say, maybe it's not meant to be controlled. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But even the attempt made a difference, because every moment I chose awareness over control, I felt something loosen inside me, something small but sacred, a quiet kind of strength. It's strange how, when you stop trying to hold everything together, things start to fall into place naturally. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You start seeing that peace isn't fragile at all. It's not dependent on how calm or chaotic life is. It's the calm within the chaos, the still point you can return to no matter what's happening outside. And that's the paradox that took me years to understand. Peace isn't control. Peace is surrender. Not the passive kind, not giving up, but the kind that trusts. The kind that says, I can't control everything and I don't have to. The kind that lets life move through you instead of fighting against it. That's where real strength lives. Not in resistance, but in presence. Not in certainty, but in openness. And maybe that's what freedom really is. Not the absence of storms, but the ability to remain whole through them. Maybe that's what Jung meant by true inner mastery. Not power over life, but peace with it. There's something strange that happens when you finally stop trying to control the world. You start to notice how much of your pain comes from within. It's like realizing that the storm you've been fighting isn't outside at all. It's been raging in your own mind the entire time. For years, I thought my reactions were justified, that anger, anxiety, defensiveness, sadness, all of it came from what people did to me. But slowly, painfully, I began to see that most of what I felt was just an echo, a reflex from old wounds I never acknowledged. You can live your whole life reacting and never actually see yourself. That was me. Someone would say something critical and I'd instantly feel that tightening in my chest, the same one I'd felt as a kid when I thought I wasn't enough. I'd argue, defend, explain, anything to make the feeling go away. But nothing ever worked, because I wasn't really talking to the person in front of me. I was talking to the ghost of my past, the voice that once told me I had to be perfect to be loved. It's such a strange thing, how the past keeps whispering through you long after it's gone. How the smallest comment can send you spiraling into shame, or a single look can reopen an old wound. You think you're living as an adult, making conscious choices, but most of the time you're just reenacting ancient pain, and it's exhausting. Because no matter how much you achieve or how kind you are, some part of you still believes you're fighting for survival, for approval, for belonging, for love. I remember one night I completely lost it over something insignificant. Someone close to me forgot something I'd said, and I exploded. But even as I was speaking, I could feel it, that it wasn't really about them. It was like watching myself from the outside, seeing a child throwing a tantrum through my adult body. When it was over, I sat there in silence, ashamed. And for the first time, I didn't try to justify it. I didn't say, well, they should have listened. I just sat with the discomfort, the rawness of it, and whispered, this isn't who I am, but it's a part of me that's still hurting. That moment broke something open. I realized that I had been at war with myself for so long that I forgot what peace even felt like. I had built my entire identity around being fine, strong, composed, capable. But underneath it all, there was this trembling part of me that was still begging to be seen. The child who learned to please, to adapt, to hold everything in, just to be accepted. And no matter how much I grew or learned, that child still ran the show. The truth is, we all have that wounded child inside us, the one who learned that love could be taken away, that mistakes were dangerous, that emotions made us weak, and until we face them, we keep living as if those lessons are still true. We think our anger is about today's argument, our sadness about today's rejection, but really it's the old pain resurfacing, desperate for acknowledgement. That's when I began to understand what Jung meant by the unconscious running your life. It's not a metaphor, it's literal. You think you're making choices, but you're just following a script written long ago, one that says, don't be too emotional, or stay in control, or never let them see you vulnerable. And the more you obey that script, the smaller your world becomes. It's a terrifying thing to realize that your suffering isn't random, that the chaos in your life has a pattern, but it's also liberating, because once you see the pattern, you can begin to rewrite it. You start catching yourself in those moments of reactivity. You pause and ask, what am I really feeling right now? Whose voice am I hearing? Sometimes the answer hurts. Sometimes it's humiliating. But with every honest moment, you reclaim a little more of your freedom. The hardest part is that healing doesn't look like perfection. It looks like awareness, quiet, uncomfortable awareness. You still get triggered. You still overreact sometimes. But instead of getting lost in it, you start to see it for what it is. An echo, not the truth. And in that moment of seeing, something changes. You're no longer a victim of your emotions. You're their witness. I used to think strength meant never breaking down. Now I know it means having the courage to look at the parts of yourself you've spent your whole life running from. The anger, the shame, the fear, the sadness, all of it. Because those parts aren't your enemies. They're your teachers. They've been trying to get your attention, to show you where you're still wounded. It's not easy. Sometimes you feel like you're losing your mind, like peeling back layer after layer of pain with no end in sight. But every time you face what's real, every time you stop pretending and start listening, you grow quieter inside, more grounded, more whole. You start to feel something you can't quite name, a subtle peace that doesn't depend on things being okay. I think that's where healing really begins. Not when the pain disappears, but when you stop running from it. When you finally turn toward the storm inside you and whisper, okay, I'm listening, because once you do that, the storm starts to lose its power. It's not that it stops, but it no longer defines you. You begin to see that the chaos, the emotions, the confusion, they're not who you are. They're just weather passing through the sky of your being. And beneath all of it, there's stillness, always. You just have to remember to look. There's a moment, and it comes quietly, almost imperceptibly, when you stop fighting the darkness inside you, not because you've given up, but because you finally understand that it was never the enemy. For me, that realization didn't arrive with fireworks or enlightenment. It came during a night when I was too tired to keep pretending that I was okay. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the weight of my own thoughts, and I whispered to myself, maybe I don't need to fix this anymore. Maybe I just need to listen. That was the first time I met my shadow, not as a monster, but as a part of me that had been waiting to be seen. For years, I had kept it locked away. All the anger, jealousy, shame, and grief I didn't want to admit to. I told myself those emotions made me weak, unworthy, unspiritual. I tried to bury them under achievements and kindness and endless self-improvement. But the shadow doesn't die from being ignored. It grows in the dark, quietly shaping the way you think, act, and love, until one day you realize you've been living half a life. The safe half. I used to think healing meant becoming light, But now I know it means embracing the dark, too. It's about realizing that your imperfections, your flaws, your contradictions, they're not proof of your brokenness. They're proof of your humanity. Jung said that until we integrate the shadow, it will keep running our lives. I didn't understand that at first, but I began to see how every judgment I made about others was really a mirror. Every irritation, every criticism was showing me something I couldn't accept in myself. It was uncomfortable, almost unbearable, to see how much of my virtue was just repression dressed as morality. I thought I was patient until I realized I was just afraid of conflict. I thought I was humble until I saw that I was terrified of being disliked. I thought I was kind until I saw that I was seeking approval, not connection. The shadow strips away your illusions one by one until all that's left is something raw and real. The you that doesn't need to be perfect to be whole. There's a kind of sacred honesty that begins to grow when you stop trying to be good and start trying to be real. You start to recognize that the parts of yourself you've condemned, the rage, the envy, the fear, are not evil. They're just unhealed. They were born from pain, from moments when love was withheld or safety was taken away. Those emotions don't need to be punished. They need to be understood. I remember one day I caught myself in the middle of an argument, feeling that old surge of defensiveness rise in my chest. But instead of lashing out, I paused. I could almost hear a younger version of me shouting, "Don't let them hurt you again." And suddenly, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt compassion. That was the first time I realized that the shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to protect you. It's just been doing it the only way it knows how. It's strange how, once you stop fearing your darkness, it starts to lose its sharpness. The anger that once felt uncontrollable becomes a signal, a message saying something here needs attention. The sadness that once felt unbearable becomes a doorway into tenderness. Even fear becomes something you can sit beside instead of something that owns you. It's not about eliminating these emotions. It's about creating space for them. What no one tells you is that integration feels a lot like heartbreak, because you start to mourn the version of yourself you've been pretending to be. You realize how much energy you've wasted trying to seem okay, to seem strong, to seem enlightened. And yet, beneath the grief, there's relief. The kind that comes from finally being allowed to exist as you are, messy, contradictory, human. When I began to accept those parts of myself, I noticed something else. Compassion. Not just for me, but for others. I stopped expecting perfection from them too. I began to understand that everyone is fighting their own shadow, just trying to make peace with the noise inside. You stop taking things so personally. You stop needing everyone to be a certain way. You just start seeing, really seeing, that we're all carrying pain we don't talk about. The irony is that by embracing your darkness, you actually become lighter, you laugh easier, you breathe deeper, you stop bracing for impact all the time because you're no longer running from yourself. You start to feel whole, not because everything is healed, but because you no longer believe it needs to be. There's a line I once read, "The wound is where the light enters." I used to think it meant you had to close the wound afterward, to fix it, to seal it up. But now I think the point is to keep it open, to let the light keep coming in. The shadow isn't something to conquer, it's something to love, because inside it lies every part of you that still believes you're unworthy of love. So now, when I feel that familiar darkness stirring, I no longer resist it. I sit with it. I ask it what it needs. Sometimes it just wants to be heard. Sometimes it wants rest. Sometimes it wants forgiveness, but always, always it wants truth. And the more I give it that, the quieter it becomes. Maybe that's what real peace is. not the absence of shadows, but learning to dance with them. Letting go of who you thought you were is terrifying. I don't think people talk about that enough. We say words like growth and transformation as if they're beautiful, graceful processes. But they're not. They're messy, they're disorienting. They feel like dying because in a way, they are. Something old has to collapse before something new can take its place. For me, it started when I realized how tightly I'd been clinging to my identity. Every label, every role, every story I'd told myself about who I was, it was all armor. I didn't know who I was without it. I was the strong one, the helper, the responsible one. It made me feel safe, even proud. But underneath, it was suffocating. Because the moment you attach yourself too deeply to a role, you stop being able to breathe outside of it. I began to see how much of my identity was built on fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being ordinary. I needed people to see me in a certain light because I couldn't bear to face the parts of me that didn't fit the image. So I'd edit myself, soften my truth, shrink my desires just enough to stay acceptable. It felt easier than being real. Until one day, it didn't. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and not recognizing the person staring back. It wasn't about appearance. It was deeper than that. It was like looking at a mask I'd been wearing for years, one that had molded itself to my skin. And beneath that mask, there was silence. A silence I had avoided for as long as I could. That's when I realized I had mistaken adaptation for authenticity. What no one tells you about change is that your old self doesn't want to go quietly. It fights for survival. It seduces you with comfort. It whispers, stay where it's familiar. You know how to live here. And for a while, I listened. I tried to hold on to my old habits, my old relationships, my old version of me. But the more I tried to stay the same, the heavier everything felt, like carrying around someone else's life. One day, something inside me just broke. Not dramatically, just a soft, exhausted surrender. I stopped pretending I knew who I was supposed to be, and in that surrender, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. The kind that comes when you finally stop performing, the kind that feels like coming home. It's strange how empty it feels at first, that space where your old identity used to be. It's like standing in the ruins of a house you once loved, not knowing what to build next. But slowly the emptiness becomes fertile. You start noticing things you never noticed before. Small joys, quiet truths, forgotten dreams. The voice inside you, the one that was buried under expectation and fear, begins to whisper again, softly at first, then louder. That's when you realize that identity was never meant to be a cage. It was meant to be a bridge, something to walk across, not something to live inside. You start understanding that you're not a fixed being. You're a process. You're not the roles you play, not the mistakes you've made, not even the person you were yesterday. You're the awareness that experiences it all, the one watching the story unfold. There's a moment, after enough letting go, when you begin to taste real freedom. You notice that you don't have to control how others see you anymore. You don't have to prove your worth or justify your choices. You can just be unpolished, unplanned, unafraid. It feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. But here's the thing. Freedom isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff with no idea what comes next. The mind panics because it wants something solid to hold on to. It wants definition, but the soul thrives in open space. And if you can stay there, in that uncertain, open, alive space, something miraculous happens. You begin to trust. You start trusting that life isn't trying to destroy you when it takes things away. It's trying to free you. You start trusting that you don't need to know who you'll become. You just need to stay present long enough to meet them. You stop needing answers and start living the questions instead. That's when you realize that all the identities you've worn, the achiever, the caretaker, the dreamer, the skeptic, they were all just expressions of the same essence trying to find itself. You don't have to kill them off. You just have to love them enough to let them go. And slowly, as you release who you thought you were, you start becoming who you really are. Not someone new, but someone ancient. The you that's been here all along. Beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the endless need to be someone. That's the quiet truth I wish someone had told me earlier. You don't become yourself by adding more layers. You become yourself by shedding everything that isn't you. And it's not a process of improvement, it's a process of remembering. So now, when I feel lost, I remind myself, maybe being lost isn't the problem. Maybe it's the doorway. Because sometimes to truly find yourself, you have to let yourself disappear first. I used to think that letting go meant indifference, that detachment was some kind of emotional numbness, a cold distance from life. But I see now that it's the exact opposite. Real detachment isn't the absence of feeling, it's the presence of peace in the middle of it all. It's loving deeply without needing to possess. It's caring sincerely without needing to control. It's trusting life even when it makes no sense. I learned this the hard way, through heartbreak, through disappointment, through countless moments of resistance. I wanted things to go my way. I wanted people to act the way I imagined they should. I wanted life to obey the plans I had carefully written in my head. But life doesn't work like that. It unfolds the way it must, not the way we want. And the more I fought that truth, the more I suffered. It's strange how much of our pain comes not from what happens to us, but from our refusal to accept it. I used to carry this invisible weight of how things should be. Every unmet expectation, every broken promise, every change I didn't ask for, it all felt like a personal failure. But slowly, painfully, I began to see that life was never betraying me. It was just being itself. The betrayal was mine, in expecting it to be otherwise. Viktor Frankl once wrote that everything can be taken from a person except one thing, the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. I used to admire that line. Now I live by it. It's easy to talk about freedom when life is kind. It's harder when everything collapses. But those moments are where real freedom is born. When you can't change what's happening, but you can change how you meet it. I remember a time when everything I cared about seemed to fall apart at once. I felt helpless, cornered, angry. I kept asking, why is this happening to me? As if the universe owed me an explanation. But then something shifted. I realized that my suffering didn't come from the situation itself. It came from my insistence that it shouldn't be this way. The moment I stopped arguing with reality, even for a second, I felt something unfamiliar, a quiet relief. The world hadn't changed, but I had. That's what detachment really is. It's not resignation, it's acceptance. It's not giving up, it's giving over, it's surrendering to what is without losing your center. You still feel joy and pain, but they don't throw you off balance anymore. You can watch them come and go like waves, knowing the ocean beneath remains calm. I used to believe strength meant holding on. Now I know it often means letting go of control, of expectations, of the idea that life owes you comfort or fairness. It doesn't. Life gives you what you need to grow, and sometimes that means it breaks you open. But the breaking isn't punishment, it's preparation. You begin to see that every loss, every disappointment, every uncertainty was a quiet invitation to return to yourself. Because that's what detachment ultimately is, coming home. It's remembering that you were never meant to cling to fleeting things for stability. Jobs end, people change, plans fail. But your awareness, your presence, the stillness within you, that's eternal. That's the only thing you've ever truly owned. There's a story about a monk who carried a beautiful cup and said, "To me, this cup is already broken." When asked why, he said, "Because one day it will fall or I will stop breathing, and both the cup and I will return to dust. So while it's here, I enjoy it fully." That's detachment. It's loving something deeply, knowing it will end. It's saying yes to life while knowing it will hurt. Since learning this, I've started to live differently. I still make plans, still care, still love, but I hold everything with open hands. When something goes wrong, I ask, can I accept this moment as it is? Sometimes the answer is no, and that's okay too. But even that honesty brings peace. Because peace isn't about constant calm, it's about honesty with what's true right now. The more I practice, the more I see how much energy I used to waste fighting the inevitable. How much of my life was spent trying to control what was never mine to control. And in releasing that need, I discovered something unexpected: joy. Not the kind that depends on everything going right, but the kind that exists quietly underneath it all. I used to think peace was a reward, something you earned after solving all your problems. But now I see it's a choice. It's the decision, moment by moment, to stop fighting with life, to let go of what's beyond you and take responsibility for what's within you. When I finally understood that, everything softened. The edges of fear, the urgency, the tightness in my chest, all of it began to fade. Not because life became easier, but because I stopped demanding it to be, and what was left was something I can only describe as grace, the quiet knowing that even in chaos, I am okay. Maybe that's what true detachment really means, not turning away from life, but finally being able to meet it fully, without needing it to be different. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It lingers quietly beneath your skin, shaping the way you breathe, the way you love, the way you protect yourself from being hurt again. For years, I thought the goal was to escape it, to outgrow it, outthink it, meditate it away. But pain doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It waits, it teaches, it becomes the language through which life tries to wake you up. I used to see pain as an interruption to my happiness, something that needed to be fixed or avoided. But I've come to realize that pain is the path. Every time I was broken open, I discovered something deeper than I could have learned in comfort. It's like nature itself. A seed can't sprout without cracking, and a butterfly can't fly without struggling in the cocoon. The breaking is what makes becoming possible. There was a period in my life when I felt like I was drowning in disappointment. Everything I'd built was falling apart. My plans, my confidence, even my sense of purpose. I remember thinking, this can't be what life is supposed to feel like. But in the middle of that darkness, something subtle shifted. I stopped asking why it was happening and started asking what it was trying to show me. That single question changed everything, because when you stop seeing pain as an enemy, you start to see its intelligence. It's not there to punish you, it's there to transform you. Pain reveals the parts of you that are still asleep, the attachments you cling to, the illusions you hide behind, the truths you've been too afraid to face. It doesn't destroy you. It strips away what's false so that what's real can finally emerge. I remember reading about Dostoevsky once, how he faced execution, stood before a firing squad, and then at the last second was spared. That moment changed him forever. He began to write with a depth that only someone who has looked into the face of death could, and it made me wonder, do we really need to be broken before we wake up? Maybe we do. Maybe consciousness itself is born through pain. The truth is, We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid suffering that we miss the beauty hiding inside it. We numb ourselves with distractions, chase comfort, and call it happiness. But there's no growth in comfort. The people who inspire us most, the ones who radiate real peace, they've suffered deeply. The difference is they let their suffering shape them instead of define them. They let it open them instead of harden them. I started to do the same. When something hurt, instead of running, I began to sit with it. I'd close my eyes and ask, what is this pain trying to teach me? Sometimes the answer came as silence, sometimes as a memory I hadn't faced, sometimes as tears that felt like they'd been waiting for years to be released. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. But every time I faced my pain instead of resisting it, I grew lighter, freer, more whole. And here's the thing, pain doesn't just reveal your wounds, it reveals your strength. Every time you survive what you thought you couldn't, something inside you expands. You realize that you can hold both agony and beauty at once. You realize that your heart is capable of breaking open and still loving, still hoping, still choosing kindness. That's not weakness, that's grace. I think the real difference between pain and suffering is meaning. Pain is inevitable. It's part of being alive. But suffering is what happens when you resist it, when you label it as wrong, when you cling to the idea that life should be different. The moment you give your pain meaning, the moment you decide to let it teach you, it transforms from a wound into wisdom, and suddenly, even your darkest memories start to look different. You see how each loss, each heartbreak, each failure was guiding you somewhere. You see that none of it was wasted, that even when you were breaking, something inside you was being built, resilience, empathy, depth. One night, during one of those long stretches of loneliness, I wrote in my journal, maybe life isn't supposed to be painless. Maybe it's supposed to be meaningful. And for the first time, that thought didn't make me sad. It made me feel alive. Because if pain is part of the deal, it means that love, joy, and peace are too. They just require us to feel everything, not only the easy parts. Now, when something hurts, I try to remind myself, this is life happening through me. This is the fire that shapes the gold. It doesn't mean I enjoy it, far from it, but I trust it. I know that one day I'll look back and see the pattern, the quiet perfection of it all. So if you ever find yourself in that place where the weight feels too heavy, where you think you'll never recover, please remember this. You will. And not only will you recover, you'll become someone new, someone softer, wiser, stronger, someone who understands that the point was never to avoid the pain, but to let it change you, because in the end, the pain doesn't take anything essential away from you. It only burns away what isn't truly you, and what's left, what remains after the fire, is something unshakable, something that no storm can destroy. At some point, I realized that every insight means nothing unless it's lived. I had spent years reading, reflecting, meditating, gathering truths like precious stones, but my life still felt like a battlefield. I knew so much, and yet I was still a prisoner of my emotions. That's when it hit me. Understanding isn't transformation, it's only the doorway. Walking through it takes courage, so I began to practice. Not perfectly, not consistently, just honestly. Every day I asked myself, what am I resisting right now? Sometimes it was a feeling I didn't want to feel. Sometimes it was a person I refused to forgive. Sometimes it was just my own fatigue, the voice that said, you should be stronger than this. But the more I paid attention, the more I saw that resistance was the root of all my suffering. Not the pain itself, but my fight against it. It's humbling how much energy we spend trying to avoid the inevitable. We tell ourselves, once this passes, then I'll be at peace. But peace doesn't come later. It comes in the middle of the storm when you stop running. I used to think I needed to fix everything before I could rest. Now I know I need to rest before I can fix anything. There was a morning, I remember it vividly, when I sat in silence with a cup of coffee watching sunlight crawl across the floor. Nothing extraordinary was happening, but for the first time in months, I felt completely present. No thoughts about yesterday or tomorrow, no need to change anything. Just breath, warmth, and stillness. It felt like coming home after a long journey, and I realized, this is it. This is what I'd been chasing my whole life. The world didn't stop being chaotic. People still disappointed me. Plans still fell apart, but something in me stopped breaking every time it happened. I started to see each challenge differently, not as punishment, but as practice. Every irritation, every moment of doubt, every hurtful word became a chance to choose consciousness over reaction. Sometimes I failed miserably. Sometimes I caught myself mid-fall and laughed. But slowly, the space between what happened and how I reacted grew wider, and in that space, I found freedom. That's what Jung meant when he said that freedom isn't control over life, but mastery of your inner world. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. You can't predict the wind, but you can adjust your sails. I stopped trying to make life easy. Instead, I tried to make myself strong, not through resistance, but through acceptance. And the truth is, this kind of strength doesn't feel like power. It feels like softness. It's the ability to stand in the middle of chaos and whisper, "It's okay." It's the quiet knowing that whatever comes, you'll meet it. Not because you're fearless, but because you've learned that fear is just another passing cloud. I started small. When something upset me, I'd pause and ask, what if I didn't resist this? When I felt anxiety rise, I'd breathe and say, let it be. When someone hurt me, I'd remind myself, they're acting from their pain, just like I used to. It wasn't about being passive. It was about seeing clearly, about not letting the unconscious drag me into old patterns. And with every moment of awareness, the noise inside me grew quieter. The guilt softened. The anger faded faster. I stopped needing to prove myself. I stopped trying to be liked. I began to feel a strange kind of contentment. Not the fleeting kind that depends on good days, but the steady kind that exists underneath everything. What surprised me most was how ordinary it felt. Inner peace isn't a lightning bolt. It's not fireworks or divine revelations. It's the way the air feels after a long storm, clear, gentle, alive. It's doing the same things you always did, working, walking, talking, but with a lightness you can't explain. Of course, I still forget. I still get swept away sometimes, still lose my balance, but I no longer see that as failure. I see it as part of the dance. Awareness isn't about staying still. It's about remembering your way back. Each time you come home to yourself, it becomes easier. These days, I try to live by a simple truth. Don't seek perfection, seek presence. Don't chase peace, practice returning to it. Because peace isn't something you find. It's something you remember. It's been here all along, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath every layer of who you thought you had to be. And the more I live this way, the more I understand. Real transformation doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, like morning light through open curtains. It doesn't change what you see. It changes how you see. Maybe that's the whole point. You don't transcend life by escaping it. You transcend it by embracing it completely. The joy and the sorrow, the light and the dark. Because when you finally stop dividing life into good and bad, pleasure and pain, success and failure, you realize it was never two things. It was always one. And that's when peace becomes unshakable, not because the world is calm, but because you are. I think the hardest truth to face is that knowing all of this doesn't automatically make life easy. There's no finish line, no permanent state of enlightenment where you stop feeling fear or pain. There's only awareness and what you do with it, moment by moment. But something shifts when you finally accept that. You stop waiting for peace to arrive like a miracle and start creating it through small, quiet choices every day. At some point, I realized I had to stop treating awakening like a theory and start living it in the most ordinary moments, in how I spoke to people, how I handled stress, how I treated myself when I fell short. I began asking simple but powerful questions. What am I feeling right now? What am I avoiding? What would love do here? And every time I answered honestly, I felt a little more alive. You start to see that emotional freedom isn't dramatic. It's not fireworks or spiritual perfection. It's waking up and choosing to be kind when you could be right. It's noticing irritation and deciding not to feed it. It's forgiving yourself for not knowing better sooner. It's walking through the same old world, but with new eyes, softer, clearer, more compassionate. I used to think growth was about adding something, more knowledge, more strength, more control. But it's really about subtraction. Every day I try to let go of one thing that no longer serves me, an old belief, a heavy expectation, a story about who I'm supposed to be. And in that letting go, I find space to breathe, to feel, to be. There's a strange beauty in how ordinary this practice is. No one sees it. There are no certificates, no applause, no aha moments that last forever. Just 1,000 small acts of awareness that quietly change your life from the inside out. It's like water carving a canyon, invisible in the moment but unstoppable over time. Sometimes I still fall back into old patterns. I get impatient, defensive, afraid, but I've stopped punishing myself for it. Now when that happens, I just notice it and say, there you are. I treat those moments like old friends, not enemies, not failures, just parts of me that forgot they were loved. That simple shift changes everything. It's humbling, really, to realize how much of life isn't about control or achievement, but about presence, about showing up again and again, even when you don't feel ready, about forgiving yourself 100 times for forgetting who you are, and then remembering again. Awareness doesn't make you perfect. It makes you real. One of the things I've learned is that silence is a teacher. When you allow yourself to just sit, without distraction, without forcing answers, something inside begins to settle. It's not that the noise disappears, it just loses its authority. Beneath the noise, there's a steady rhythm, a calm pulse of being that's always been there. That's who you really are, the witness, the awareness behind every thought, every emotion, every story. And once you start living from that place, life stops being a problem to solve. It becomes something to experience. You stop dividing it into good and bad, success and failure. You start to see that everything, even your mistakes, was necessary to bring you here. Every heartbreak taught you compassion. Every disappointment taught you humility. Every struggle taught you strength. And suddenly, even your past begins to make sense. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I don't ask for an easy day. I ask for a conscious one. I ask for the courage to stay awake, to meet whatever comes without turning away, because that's what this journey really is. Not escaping life, but embracing it with open eyes and an open heart. And maybe that's the quiet revolution we've all been searching for. Not some grand awakening, but the willingness to live truthfully in each moment, to feel what's here, to respond with love, even when it's hard, to keep choosing awareness over autopilot again and again. That's how peace becomes not an idea, but a way of being. Not something fragile, but something you carry with you everywhere. In the silence, in the noise, in the heartbreak, in the joy. Because once you've seen that the peace you were searching for has always been within you, you stop chasing. You stop grasping. You just live, fully, deeply, quietly. And somehow, that's enough.